let me know when. Okay. So welcome everyone. Today we have Ishraq Fatafra. She's actually, I just don't want to read from her presenter bio because I know her from so long. I met her in one of the symposiums long back, and then we went to Shakkan in Berlin and then London, and we met there. And she's actually one of the most prominent member of our community. So she's 6-time Sitecore MVP, and she is the CTO of Apple Tech. It's a digital customer experience agency based on Amman, Jordan. And I don't think she needs a lot of introduction because we are all here from the Sitecore community, and we know her. We actually appreciate so much for her contribution. She's like, you know, member of Sitecore community for so long. But I need to say, like, you know, she's also like, you know, the director, like, you know, the technology evangelist, solution architect, technical director for, like, you know, 16 years in this industry. She has a lot of experience. So today she's going to present in pursuit of inclusive digital future, Sitecore consideration. And Ishraq, thank you so much for taking the invitation and joining us and presenting this session. Thank you.
Actually, thank you, Hamadi and Malik, for this opportunity. It's always a pleasure speaking to you, and it's always good to come and see you guys digitally and hopefully soon in person, and everyone in this session. And as you've mentioned, I'm gonna just jump right into it. And I think one of the main reasons why I wanted to kick off the discussion, let me know which screen I'm on. Yeah, one of the main reasons why I wanted to start the discussion this year about accessibility is the fact that over the past 2 years, many of the work that we've been doing is related to it. So basically, fun fact, one of the clients we were working with, they're multi-brands, multi-market commerce website. They have different brands that they're working with, different websites, and we wanted to do some remediation work for them. And as trivial as it is to add an alt text to an image, right? Because one of the small things that we can do to our websites, to our components, to our implementations when it comes to accessibility, making sure things are available for people with disabilities, just to provide that text on an image. And for one site, it took us effort to update that for 30,000 different images for one site. And you can imagine the effort being put to do that, to do this remediation. And one aspect of the accessibility, for an alt text, you mean we want to go through all the images. You need to provide descriptive and meaningful value to that description, because for these readers, it's not about maybe doing a script, copy the name of the image into the alt text as we usually do in the past. It's more about making sure whatever we're presenting as a replacement for that image is actually meaningful. And on top of that, go back to your code, go through all the components that uses images, make sure it provides support for image fields. So as trivial that activity is, it's costing time, it's costing way too much effort to be put in place. And when you look into the team that you're allocating to do this effort, it's actually costing you money and costing the clients money to do that. So back in 2020, WebIM they did a market research and they found that 98% of the world's top 1 million websites do not offer full accessibility. So we're talking about accessibility as a concept, as a standard. It's not something new. But since COVID hit, as many of governments, educational institutions, healthcare, and many of these services has, like, at certain points has fully been shifted and moved into digital, it just uncovered how much work is needed to make sure that we're providing content, we're providing services, we're providing values in an equal way for everyone who works or interacts with our website and with our brands. So I want to just take a minute and discuss this from 3 main perspectives and think how we start to think about accessibility, normalizing accessibility, normalizing the work that we do is not an exception. It's not a second thought. It's not something that we need to do after we're done with our websites or with our implementations. It should be part of our brand identity. It should be part of our thinking from day one, because that's the simple thing and the easiest thing that we can do just to make sure we provide an equal opportunity for everyone. So we're going to discuss this from a strategy perspective. So whether you are a digital strategist or involved in strategy in a way or another, and it's sad sometimes you can go and do some research and you find articles how to convince your company or your client to adapt for accessibility. So just the thought of these people or these stakeholders need convincing is alarming. So how we can make sure that we're able to convey that in a way that's naturally part of our digital strategy and digital experiences, how we think about that by design. And it's similar to all the work and effort we've put towards making privacy by design, right? Now it's not even a second thought for you to, whenever you implement a form or do a subscription, you think about consent. When you do personalization, you adapt to cookie management system, you're starting to think about people data and privacy just from the get-go. And this is what we hope to achieve one day is accessibility by design. It's a natural thing to do. And finally, from an implementation perspective, and again, it does not have to do just only from a backend development perspective. It could be backend, could be QA and testing, it could be from content authoring. These can help you make sure you are providing an accessible content for everyone. All right, so if we take a step back and look into the definition of accessibility, the first thing that comes to mind is physical environments, right? So when people think about, I need to make sure my digital offering or my services are being provided, we should not only limit that to that narrow definition of physicalities. It could be sensory environments, like issues seeing, with hearing, even with touching. That could be some sort or form of disability. Cognitive environment, same thing with being able to convey a message, being able to communicate in an understandable way. That's not always the case. And that doesn't mean you should be limited to the way you are interacting with these websites. Could be permanent, could be temporary. You've been part of an accident, you have an injury that limits your usability to these services. Could be situational. And they give this example of a new parent or a mom is holding a baby and she's doing other stuff. So that kind of an accessibility need that we need to make sure that we are conforming with when we develop our website. So an example that always jumped to mind, pavements, right? So at the end of each pavement, when you get from the street, there is this slope that allows a wheelchair to get above the street, right? And if you think about it from a holistic perspective, it's not only inclusive for people with wheelchair, right? Parents with a stroller use it, a traveler with their traveling bag, can see bikers or scooter, if they don't have specific lane in the streets, they use that. So if we look at that from a holistic perspective, we're able to identify new audiences. We're able to identify new channels of interaction with our websites. So make sure that our understanding to these accessibility needs are not limited to our own biases or understanding, but actually take into account everyone else that we interact with. Familiarization with the accessibility standards. And as I've just mentioned, accessibility is not something new. The shift towards adhering to that could have started to be very visible and apparent because it's no longer something that you can get away with. If you're in a governmental institution, there's legislation that make you, conformance with specific accessibilities, and there's many of them. I'm just like listing a couple as an example. So when you look into these accessibility standards, you need to put that within the context of your industry, because government institution might have their own. For example, in our region, we use the WCAG standards, and on top of that, we have like local or country level kind of web accessibility that we need to be adherent with. Same thing with education or healthcare. So if I take the web content accessibility guideline as an example, just to showcase the different principles and how we can, again, just put everything within context where, why, and where these standards are being put. Number one is perceivable. So just 1 second. Yeah, so perceivability, it means that we provide support to users who have difficulty with, the senses, the sounds, and touch, for people who needs an aid and assistive technology to help them with that. So the way these information being constructed in the site, the way you're designing your web pages should take into account another device, which is accessibility or assistive technology that can help you with it. Operability, and that's also related to users with motor difficulties, that their interaction might need a keyboard. They might not be able to use a mouse or not able to use voice recognition channels, but they need to have a keyboard to help them get through the website. Could be a navigation, could be a checkout process, could be filling a form and moving back and forward. So the way we are implementing these components, the way we're putting these components in the page should follow a meaningful order or a meaning. So for me, if I go to the top navigation, some of the things that you need to think about also as part of your content strategy, and it goes hand in hand, is how you think about your sitemap, how you think about your items in the Sitecore tree, right? It should be, okay, when I do my navigation, should I go top level navigation when I move in my tabs? Should I go from menu 1, 2, 3, or should I just go, I keep confusing vertical and horizontal, but you get what I mean. It's like top level and children. Do I get to the first menu and navigate through the children, then move to the next one? These questions should be brought up from the beginning. So when we go through design, we go through HTML creation, all of these things has been taken into account. Understandability. So being able to ensure that every single information or content that has been portrayed in the website has been portrayed in a meaningful way, in a clear way, and we do not need to have that an extensive set of aiding information to convey a message. And you can see that this actually goes hand in hand with usability, because that's one of the main things that you make sure you build for, right? Make sure your site is usable for your customer. So the customer journey is consistent and it provides a more efficient way. And that's the essence of that, is accessibility. And finally, being robust. Again, at the end of the day, your website is number of markup, right? It's an HTML and CSS, should be easily integrated with third-party tools, and same thing with screen readers or browsers that allow to convert, for example, voice to text. And we've been seeing this being a mandatory requirement, for example, with governmental institution in ministries in this region. you won't be able to pass go live for a website, or you won't get a sign off for approval unless the entire page can be recognized for a text to voice or text to speech functionality, where you're able to read that entire page with no issues. All right. So some of the brands, so again, with COVID, with all the regulations, and everyone wanted to be, compliant with the new rules and regulations. Some countries actually started to make that as a mandatory. In some situations, there has been some lawsuits against some brands by customers with disability when they were not able to get the service that they need. So there has been some legal action and some legal motivation for brands to actually go and adapt for accessibility. But we also see some brands who find a competitive advantage for them, being able to identify new channels that kind of drive traffic to their websites. Right now, I recall last year I worked on a tourism website, and one of the channels that we've identified besides desktop and mobile was a screen reader. And it was very fulfilling to see that the kind of websites that we are developing is actually giving a meaningful meaning for everyone, including people with disability, and they can actually identify new traffic to your website. And many of the standards, and we're going to talk about that in a bit, and some of the design choices actually is done to boost your SEO as well. So SEO activities that you're already doing can help aid you with your accessibility scoring if that's what you're looking for. Again, many lost opportunities to your website for converting visitors to actual customers goes when they bounce out from the homepage or maybe a checkout process because it's not accessible enough. It does not provide an ease or convenient for people with disability. So it helps increase your conversion rate. And again, one of the most dynamic ways of leveraging and thinking about this is to identify new personas and new touch points with your brand that can help you perform your behavioral personalization. So I think from my perspective, many would not think about it from this perspective as being able to personalize for such an audience, but that's again being part of having more inclusivity and provide more opportunity to drive customer success when you deliver value for your customers. All right, so as part of building or having an embedded accessibility to your websites, always scan your website for accessibility, whether you're, you inherited a website and you're gonna do a Sitecore edit, you're new to a website, you're developing new features, just make sure you always scan for accessibility. By default, by now, every time we develop a new feature or when we deploy a bug, one of the common activities we just do before releasing is we check for performance, right? So we don't think twice if a new feature would compromise the performance of the website. We would roll back that release because that's not passing a specific threshold or specific KPI. Same thing with accessibility. Put that to go hand in hand with these activities for a QA to pass a new functionality. They have to be accessible. For your deployments, it has to also already pass all of these stages. So you want deploy or publish inaccessible content to the site. Make it publicly, like stated publicly that you are working on addressing accessibility related issues. And we've seen this in different ways. In some in some websites, such as governmental websites would have a dedicated page for accessibility that showcase which are the tools and which are the services that they're providing that achieve accessibility. They have that as an accessibility page. And some other would opt into just posting a message that says we are aware of the accessibility issues that we have with our website, and we are continuously working towards that. And they would provide contact information, an email or a telephone number to contact them for accessibility issues. So this is just one way of showcasing that, yes, you have accessibility in mind. Set a policy and control that. So once, just similar to what I've just mentioned about testing for accessibility, you can have a policy for your content authors as well that do not allow inaccessible content to be visible on the website. You can even go to the extra mile and set a rule in your workflow to go through regulatory, right? And it won't allow content to be published if it's not accessible, because like the features themselves could go through QA testing and we can mark it as well. But when it comes to content authors, you might need to have that extra step just to make sure that they are taking that into consideration. Evaluate your CMS for built-in features. And so with Sitecore, we have multiple out-of-the-box offering now, right? With SXA, Content Hub, all the new CDB and stuff that they have created and implemented. When you use these out-of-the-box features in your system, make sure that you revisit all of these and make sure they are accessible from the get-go, even before you start your development or designing activities. And I think from my end, I've seen how the SXA has gradually enhanced to be more accessible. And like with the latest version, with 10.2 actually, I've seen a lot of things out of the box. I'm going to go through that quickly, shortly, that showcase that, yeah, Sitecore have that into account. And a thought that I had when I was looking into the built-in features, that we always look into accessibility from an end user perspective, right? As a visitor, how I can use the website and have the tools that help me as a visitor. But how about me as a CMS user? What if I am, as a content author, have some disabilities that I need to look at? So this is just a thought. Look into that again as another stakeholder, another perspective for you to look and make sure that also the back end or the back office of your CMS also supports that and takes into account, not only from an end user perspective, but from a user perspective. Share info with your content authors. Again, that also goes into educating, and make sure once you have a policy, stick to it. Make it to, make it a rule that if someone is pushing to create or have more authority on creating content in HTML, and I have very strong, opinions around that, but we see lots of content authors who would request to have the ability to create HTML inside the rich text as a quick way for them to publish a landing page or to create a plugin and to connect with third-party tools and this kind of stuff. So challenge them when they ask or make these requests. Make sure that they understand that they need to be able to build that with accessibility in mind. Are they able to create a semantic rich HTML by themselves that make sure that our components are accessible and available for everyone? If they don't have how to do it, can we customize the rich text editor to provide tokens or whatever tools that can help them just click and add more and more out of the box, let's say, options or semantics for the markup and the rich text that can help you take that extra mile. So lots of things that comes to mind when you think about accessibility, but make it as early as the stage from the digital evaluation of your website. When you do your content strategy from the beginning, your marketing strategy, all of these things has to come in mind. Now, the second step, when you move into design, we start to look into more specific aspects of your website. Again, one of the most common examples is the contrast of either the image with the text a text with an image, text with a background. These are very quick things to notice in your theme when you build a new design, and you can, if you run that against any of the web accessibility tools, can highlight that as quick as it can be, because it's going to either pass or fail the contrast test. And there's different ways of also cater for that. And one of the most like components that we've built and we've spent some time working on that, and even integrating that with the cookie policy, because you have to be able to save your user preferences when it comes to these accessibility options, is how to change the theme for different colors while maintaining the general theme of your brand, increase, decrease the size, support for night vision. When I switch and flip the entire theme to a dark mode, does the imagery still looks good? Is the contrast going to make it harder and harder to do that? So there's different ways to do that, but this becomes almost a mandatory component for all of the governmental, at least institution in this region. Keyboard support, as I've mentioned, this is also like a one-on-one when it comes to accessibility, making sure your design supports tab sequence. It's logical, it's meaningful to drive the entire journey. It's not about just going back and forth between links or going up to bottom. It has to convey the user journey. It has to be aligned with the persona that you're working with. When we build our websites, when we create customer journey, we drive all of that as part of the customer journey, right? Their journey from A to Z passes through these different routes based on their personas. And when you even think about the keystroke, when you think about the tab, the location of that as you go through that, it should also be consistent with your customer journey. It can't just be randomly because I want to implement accessibility and just put tabs whatsoever. An interesting thing that I've learned as well when I was looking into this is users who have some form of dyslexia. And I'll be honest, I've never even thought about that whenever I looked into disability. But as mentioned before, when you look into, accessibility needs from a holistic perspective, you start to identify a new audience and new personas that you were not thinking about. So users with dyslexia have issues interpreting the abbreviation of dates. So I'll talk about dates in a minute. But when you abbreviate the date to be like November the 8th, like NOV, or 8th of November, this abbreviation could be hard for people who have difficulties reading words and letters. So that's also something. You don't think about it. We need to learn to think about it. And next time we implement a calendar, or we go the extra mile of deciding how am I gonna showcase the event date and time to add it to a calendar, we go that extra mile, right? Make sure when it's added to a calendar, it's taking the time zone of the recipient and this kind of stuff. Also think about the format that we are presenting, how intuitive and how easy it is for users. Interactive elements are easy to identify, such as, the carousel in the home page, or a video that automatically plays at the beginning of a landing page. Make sure that you give them the time to interact with it, have the controls to be able to pause and go through these elements, because the video could be playing as fast as you can, faster than the accessibility tools be able to navigate from a component to the other, losing part of that experience. And obviously being able to create for various screens, but at the same time making sure we're not breaking the functionality and design when we implement these things. So yeah, so an example of just like a contrast of this home link with the background, it failed like the standards of A and triple A, but it did not fail the A standard. So when you look into that again, you put into context your understanding of the standards and the industry. So on certain tools, this could fail, but does my business or the client I'm working for need more lenient accessibility constraints, or they have more strict? So these small things could be small, but also can vary by standard. Visualization, as we all know, brand identity is and mostly conveyed in ways that revolves around imagery, right? Many companies, when they build their brand, they invest so much in marketing and digital marketing assets, and they create images and we optimize images and we look into all of that. But we look into it from a pure technical aspect. The size of that image, the effect on performance, can we cache it or not? Can we serve it faster or not? While other aspects we need to think about is, are we able to convey a message without relying completely on an image? Are we able to provide the manual, right? If I'm working for a website for a manufacturer and we're showcasing a new equipment and there's a manual with the steps, are we able to provide that information without relying on associating an image with a step? Can we replace relying on the image as the only source of truth with maybe a tab component that showcases step 1, 2, 3, 4, or with an accordion or any other design element that can help convey the same message, but it's more convenient and more accessible to others? Same thing with the selection of colors. The selection of colors is an interesting thing because we're talking about people who are colorblind or have issues with color. Sometimes it could trigger a neurological issue for people who interact with that. Are we able to convey these messages without solely being reliant on images? And again, when we talk about brands nowadays, we're talking about globalization. We need to take cultures into account because that's also something to look for. I like to always include this image, and this is for in the traffic light for pedestrian to walk in Germany. It contains this guy with a hat, with a mining hat, and many of us would look into this as it's a given. Someone is walking green and red, but like in some cultures, they have even a different kind of interpretation or representation for that. So culture also matter when it comes to design. Another aspect of designs is supporting localization, and localization in this context is not only just translating text elements into the language. Think about when you visit a multi-market commerce website, the first thing you get introduced with is this big pop-up that has different markets where you're being instructed to go through. Clicking on that market, select which language you want, select which currency you want, and imagine if it's a person with accessibility issues that they need to go through each one of these in a tab, or it could be just showing everything in United States English, and then they have to navigate until they get to that language switcher and switch it to their desired language. Imagine this entire process for them just to get the information they need in the language or the context that they actually live in. And it's the same thing. We all have the capability to detect the browser language or whatever for the visitors. If we can make that assumption and that decision by default, it would make it 100% even better for them. Make the selection or changing the language or the preferred currency or even the preferred, market as a second option rather than a first option. Same thing when it comes to these accessibility semantic markups. I'm going to talk about this in a bit, but we've seen cases where, you know, designer, a front-end developer would create the HTML. They will include some of the accessibility rules into the HTML, and when it's translated by developers, they take it as is. So we end up having even the accessibility conformant, you know, HTML hard-coded, and it's not taking into account that needs to be translatable as well. When we switch to you know, a screen reader, if for example, in Arabic, I'm expecting to hear the description of that image or that link in Arabic and not in English because it's hard-coded. So things to look at. Some of the accessibility tools that I've seen very helpful in the day-to-day development, like Site Improve plugin for Sitecore. So that's a package provided by Site Improve that can be installed into your Sitecore instance, and content authors during designing or content authoring can just simply run that tool while they are doing that process and check for all the accessibility issues that they have. Wave tools, this is also one that I use pretty much frequently. Again, it helps you identify the accessibility issues. It showcases the code and potential fix. Same thing with the IBM Equal Accessibility Checker. It's similar to Google Lighthouse. It can be installed as a plugin in your browser and show you some of these vulnerabilities. Screen readers, obviously, make it a point with your QA team to have an actual screen reader devices when you test against that, because sometimes there's a distinction between the browser and the screen reader, right? Similar to when you go to the length of testing responsive on a mobile device, because responsive on a browser could have some differences. Do the same when it comes to accessibility. And I know this is not a tool, but there's accessibility experts out there that you can learn from, that you can also hire, that can help you out with it. So I'm going to quickly now go through an accessibility check. It's not an accessibility check, but it's similar to when you have your go-no-go production checklist, right? To go and check your sites published, your indexer indexed, and the caching, wherever you have a list that you make sure you won't go live or you won't do a release without passing these checklists, and have something similar to that as a starter for accessibility until, you know, we are in a position to have accessibility by design, to have a normalization process towards that, and not as an additional thought. So the use of areas. So HTML semantics is a good starting point to help developers specifically enhance their accessibility knowledge and skills. And it's a set of attributes that define ways to make the web content and web application more accessible to people with disabilities. What it does, it goes to that HTML and supplements that, whether it's a widget or an interaction, with these components with extra information that can help these assistive technologies to understand what we are working with. So it has two types or two aspects to it. We have area labels, which basically provide semantic meaning to a content. From its name, it's a role, so it doesn't change any of the functionality or changes the DOM of your HTML, but provides elements with more information around that. So for example, a button, a checkbox, you would understand what does that mean from just adding something as simple as a role for that element. We have states and properties that can be applied to elements and support the area roles. And these attributes defines like a string value to these labels for their interaction with these elements. So for example, if we have a button and that button have an SVG image inside it, and we don't have a text that we can relate that the button is used to save an update or to create something new. These area labels or area description, and there's a whole list of that, can help you provide more meaningful and more useful information to these controls and components. And again, this is one way of looking into accessibility by using these HTML semantics. It's not always needed, so you have to do your due diligence and understand the various ways when we can use and when we can't use that. Again, this is, as I've mentioned at the beginning, is providing text for all your non-text content. Again, your images should have an alt text, as simple as a common sense for developers and for content authors. Videos should also have a description, as we've moved from just relying on having a video to adding a thumbnail or a cover image in case the video is not available, into also providing a description. Whether you're using a third-party tool or not is something you need to think about. With Sitecore, we have the alt image. Sitecore by default gives us an error when an alt image is missing, but I would go the extra mile and disallow saving unless this alt image is enabled, because the consequences when you have an entire product catalog with no proper alt images to that, a simple warning like this is not enough. Make it a rule, whether for a single image upload or multiple uploads, to make that a mandatory field to fill. Like in SXA, and what I like about the enhancements for the image with the caption and with URL, same thing, if you want to apply the caption for it, is that you're not only relying on having an alt image, an alt text to an image, but your entire component can have further description to it that can go beyond the simple image replacement. It can provide more information to it. And same thing with the video, with providing the description and thumbnail, again going into that alt text. And the player itself for these videos goes from I don't have an image to display, what should I display instead? I don't have a text to display, what can I display instead? And it's important to look into these things, because if you wish to extend this component in SXA and you want to create a new variant of it, make sure you are inheriting from the existing ones, because actually been thought with accessibility in mind. And if you ended up creating your own custom component, just understand how other components work and apply the same, so we don't lose this kind of support when we work on customization or extending the existing SXA components with more variants with it. This is an example of how the wave tool, for example, can show an image that has a missing alt text to it. It's very clear, it's up to the point, and you can see exactly where that is being missing. While this is the video, this is just adding an out-of-the-box SXA video player to a page. It already has the area label associated with it, which is really good. For the image, it already fills that with an alt, with a default alt text, to make sure even if we missed that and we've ended up updating a cover image or a thumbnail, that's also taken into account. So this is one of the nice things that I've started to learn in the recent SXA development, that's actually taking accessibility into account. Now, ensure information and structure are separate from presentation. And we've seen a lot of these practices when it comes to promotions. So if our website want to quickly show a campaign, and part of that campaign, we provide an offer that goes into having an image banner. And sometimes they provide the discounts, the validity of that offer as part of that image. But imagine I'm displaying that and an image reader is trying to read that image. For me, it's meaningful because all the information that I need in terms of what type of offer I'm giving, the validity of that offer, or actually having an offer is being associated within the image itself, instead of building a proper banner that shows an image, have a different component for text and for an action that can also help you convey that message, instead of relying solely on embedding these images. Same thing with the H tag, and again, the debate around SEO, which one going to be the H1 tag, and is it the page title, is it the hero banner title in a page. These conversations always been in the context of SEO and provide the proper SEO ranking, but it's also very essential and for your accessibility, because the sequence of this for readers as well take it into account. And same thing with forms. When you create forms, the indication of a mandatory field is not only visually by adding an asterisk, because again, people with colorblind or some visual impairments won't be able to identify it. Always supply that with an additional text that could look like an extra work, might need some customization on the Sitecore form, out of the box example, but do it once and you're gonna always reuse it and make it a habit to provide that extra aid if you do not have that out of the box. So this is the same, like with the Wave tool, we've been able to identify the various HTML and H structure, but basically the H1 was missing, although I have a page title component in my page. So this is another thing to take into account. It's good that we use the SXA toolbox, drag and drop components and build the page from scratch as quick as we can, but it's also need to understand to an extent, and this is something you can teach your content authors and designers, that certain components might be rendered in a different way than you would think. You would think a page title would render as an H1 tag, but that's not the case. It's rendered as a title, and by running the tool, it actually triggered me like, yeah, okay, the H1 is missing. And when I inspected this page title, it was rendered as a normal div. So something to keep in mind. Do not only rely on your assumption of how component would work, actually test it out from the beginning. So make an informative decision when you build a page. Allow users to control time limits. Yeah, this is what we've mentioned. And this is an interesting thing because, for example, if I take the slider component in SXA, you would see an issue with the links. And we're using a third-party plugin for the carousel. And one of the errors that we have is that we have the previous and next are missing a link and a text for that one. So there's something to also think about if you're using an out-of-the-box component, and if that component works with a third-party tool. Does the third-party tool also support accessibility? Does it conform with the standards that you are looking for? Another way to look into making sure components, your videos have the full controls that you need. They can enable captions. And remember, when we spend some time trying to understand how we can track clicks and visits on a YouTube video, when we embed that into a page, same thing when it comes to make sure you're providing enough controls. And maybe from a visual perspective, you think it's too much, but for people with accessibility needs, they need these things. So you need to balance and value how you want to support both audiences. And by identifying that audience at certain point with personalization, you can manage some of that. You can even provide the button to provide like a very minimal display of a page if you really need an action within your page and you have an animation and this kind of stuff as part of your brand identity appeal to visitors. You can always have another lightweight version of it that can enable and disable based on the visitor needs without them losing the value of visiting your website. Pages have title, description for topic. This is always covered. This is covered from an SEO perspective and from every single accessibility, because a reader needs to have all the information they need to identify and understand the page. Page navigation, same thing, being able to go, as mentioned before, in a logical order. And that logical order does not mean sequential. It means you have to go through what the customer journey, what we were planning to highlight. And as we know, like in the experience editor, we give the content authors the options to move components around. And if we do not think about tabbing, or if our navigation and tab strategy does not change based on that, you're going to end up also into a broken kind of a sequence. So things to keep in mind when developing these things. Same thing with the natural language, already mentioned that, but a nice thing when with the SXA website, you do not even have to add the language switcher for the page to detect a language tag in your HTML. So that's also something out of the box that showcase that with Sitecore we are supporting and providing more and more being compliance with accessibility standard. Information being conveyed by color, and again, this is something we keep stressing out because sometimes we rely on color to display and to convey information, right? So take, for example, a right or wrong scenario. You want to showcase that it's wrong to wash your hands for COVID this way. You have to do it this way, right? We've seen this extensively over the past couple of years. And many would associate like right with a green, wrong with red. But you won't only see this as an abstract colors. They are associated with a tick for right or an X for wrong, right? Because people with color blindness or have color impairments, we won't understand what do we mean by these colors as a standalone message conveying, right? They need other stuff. And by adding small things like an icon, descriptive text next to it can also help you being just color independent when you try to convey your message. And same thing with links. Links similar to image text is one of the most things that many of these accessibility readers look at, making sure that these links also when you tab, when you read that text, convey a message. Many relies on creating phone numbers or emails as part of that link. Are we able to also associate semantic markup that convey that as a message? And it's not only a plain link text. And finally, some of the challenges that we've come across, especially when you look into it during remediation, right? Site is already published, you came in, you identified the issues. And one of the most common issues that we faced is if you fix one thing, another thing would break, or it's going to introduce a new thing. And this is again comes to the way how you approach these accessibility activities. It's not only about running the tool, identifying these issues. The developers or QA who's testing for that need to understand, why do we need to create an area label this way? Why do I need to create the link and add a text to it this way? Because I might go and fix the label in it, but I then end up with a redundant IDs or similar text between multiple components that, again, gonna introduce more and more accessibility issues. Some functionalities may cause functionality break, especially those that rely on a JavaScript or CSS. If that kind of functionality is driven through code and you want to, make your IDs or certain things dynamic, now I need to look into an area label, for example, into account, could mean you have to do an entire regression test. And someone who might have developed this functionality, somehow they are no longer in the project or whatever, so could introduce a lot of things. So make sure that you think about this again beforehand. We can't control third-party plugins. And sometimes you would be working on accessibility over and over and over, and all you can improve is 0.4, and the rest of 0.6 is due to all of these third-party integration tools that we use and not necessarily accessible or standardized. Certain tools may require release to production, and many of the tools that I've showed you guys, this can run on a single page. So during development, it would be very helpful. But how you can test across the 30,000 image that we've updated as part of the remediation and adding an image text. Many of these tools that require, a scale, site scale kind of an accessibility check requires you to be already published into production. So it might cause, back and forth, multiple deployments and releases. So that kind of a caveat that needs to be identified beforehand and communicated so it does not reflect as, we're developing something wrong, but no, it's not about that, but it's kind of the process of remediation. Again, it's new for many developers, same thing for QA and content authors. So lots of learning curve needs to be taken into account. And again, it's not just a simple task of throwing anyone to fix an alt image or an ID. These things pile up and not necessarily can be done just as easy, just straightforward. And finally, some of these efforts cannot be easily measured by clients. And this is what I've mentioned at the beginning. It takes time, takes lots of effort and budget. And similar to when you do your upgrade, and if you're looking into Sitecore upgrades to remove technical debts or to put your site to the latest and greatest, many of the key stakeholders in the business won't see the value that you're doing with the upgrade. And this is the same, because they will look into the site, they will not see any changes. They're going to look into the functionality. They're not going to be able to see any changes. So that's why it's really important for your marketer and strategy team to put that as part of their KPIs to measure against, because eventually you'll be able to measure that as part of your analytics, as part of the new audiences that you've covered. Put that as a KPI, as something new you learned about your audience and who visits your website, so you can actually showcase a value of all of these activities if they can't just see it simply by looking into your website. And that's about it. This is what I wanted to just talk about and reiterate and stress on the importance of, being accessible, compliant in 2022.
Thank you so much, Ishraq. It's a great presentation, and it's such an important topic actually, that it always, for us, a lot of us, the accessibility comes kind of afterthought. There are many reasons for that, but thanks for sharing. So we are top of the hour, but I will open it up for questions if there is any. So you can ask questions.
Hey, Ishraq, this was an awesome presentation. I don't have any questions, but I just need to jump on another call at 1 o'clock. Just wanted to say thank you so much.
Thank you, Madhu.
Thanks, Madhu.
Thank you.
Yeah, no questions here, but I have a decision tree that I've used in the past for deciding whether or not an image deserves alt text or not, and to what level of customization it's got to be. So I'm going to copy that and I'm going to put that in the chat, and that's official off like the W3 website. So you can use that as a reference as well. But great presentation. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jim.
Thanks, Jim. That's very helpful. All right, Ishraq, so looks like there is no question. I have one question that I have more questions, but I think we are out of time. But do you think you mentioned that Sitecore has also, we should also consider from the content author's point of view, accessibility when someone is actually entering content in Sitecore or using Experience Editor. So what is your experience how good Sitecore is doing there? How much you think they actually took care of that?
Yeah, so content authors' experience with Sitecore most of the time relies on the content authors themselves, right? And how much they would be committed to implementing these kind of rules. And so with Sitecore, I don't think beyond providing, for the out-of-the-box components, these fields to fill, they are doing anything towards content author. I don't see like a strict kind of an implementation that been put out of the box that says yeah, in order to implement an accessible carousel, you have to do 1, 2, 3, 4. It relies on the content authors themselves, on your technical team, and how much your business value for accessibilities. But beyond that, unfortunately, I did not see any efforts in that end.
Yeah, I'm mainly asking from the point of view of, like, you know, a content author can also be challenged from the accessibility point of view. Okay, so when she is entering or he is entering something in the system, like, you know, all these things, like, you know, contrast of colors, fonts and things comes into picture, right? So are they doing anything about that?
No, and that's why the kind of restriction or restraints, or let's say content-based kind of validation, besides the markup validation that we get in the rich text, we don't get anything from Sitecore. If you want to go that extra mile, it means you're gonna extend and customize Sitecore to do that. And this is what we do when we turn that alt text for images into like a critical kind level of validation, right? Because even with Sitecore, they give that as an error, but you still can save an image with no alt text. And you have to change that into a critical level to make it impossible to save unless they provide it. So it's more of like a lenient constraint, but beyond that, personally, I have not seen anything beyond that.
All right, thank you so much. We are 4 minutes over. Thanks for your presentation. We have recorded it, and we will publish it in YouTube. This is such a good presentation, and we'll make sure to actually share with. I'm sharing with my mistake, like, you know, colleagues, definitely. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you guys for having me.
Thank you.
And speak clearer. Thanks, everyone.
Yeah,
You too.
bye.